Long had the twilight weighed upon Middle-earth, a brooding hush after Morgoth's fall, and in that hush the servants of darkness still stirred in many corners of the land. When Ar-Pharazôn, king of Númenor, came in all the glory of his strength to the shores of Middle-earth, it was said that Sauron bowed his head and surrendered. But let us now wander the path of a different tale, where he did not submit, but fled from the wrath of that proud king, even as a wolf might slink into the shadows to grow lean, cunning and savage. For in that hour, Sauron chose a different doom. Instead of kneeling, he fled eastward, and the doom of men, elves and dwarves alike would be changed forever. In that fateful moment, as the proud banners of Númenor unfurled under a golden sun, Sauron beheld their might from afar and smiled a grim, silent smile. He knew all too well the proud hearts of men, how easily they might be beguiled by fair words when force alone would not suffice. But the armies that landed upon the shores of Middle-earth were too numerous, even for him to challenge them. The fortress he had raised in Mordor, though strong, was not impregnable to such an onslaught, nor was his one ring yet fully commanding the hearts of all. Pride would have urged him to confront this threat, but cunning whispered otherwise. Thus did he retreat under a darkening sky, leaving behind orcs too weak to stand against the might of Númenor. He vanished like a wraith into the unknown east. And so the grand campaign of Ar-Pharazôn found Mordor empty of its lord. Long was that journey, for Sauron moved in secrecy, never lingering too long in any realm. He abandoned the black standards that once announced his dominion, and traveled in various guises, sometimes passing as a hooded wanderer among easterling tribes, sometimes a robed counselor in the courts of petty kings who thirsted for forbidden lore. And ever the one ring lay upon his finger, though hidden from sight, fueling his will and stoking his malice. In deep valleys and wind-swept plains, in the hidden passes of the eastern mountains and beyond the Sea of Rhûn, he carried with him the memory of defeat and the promise of vengeance. Every day his hatred of the West grew. Though he had left behind Baradur's black silhouette against the sky, Sauron was no less a lord of darkness in spirit. In strange lands he found tribes of men who knew little of elves, who feared the unknown power of western realms. He revealed small shadows of his knowledge, calling forth illusions that dazzled mortal eyes. Through silver-tongued speech, he sowed seeds of discontent among chieftains and warlords. Many had resented the arrogance of the West, for rumors of Númenor's might had passed into fable, and these tribes quietly bristled with envy of a power they could neither see nor challenge. Sauron nurtured their grievances, speaking of stolen glories and ancient rights. At times he would pause in lonely fortresses or among camps of horse lords, forging ephemeral alliances before vanishing again into the trackless wild. He did not yet reveal his true identity, but rumors began to spread of a mighty sorcerer with eyes like embers and a voice that could charm the birds from the sky. They whispered of a towering figure in black raiment, who carried secrets in a golden band upon his hand. Yet none knew where he slept, nor whither he would go next. A terror of the unknown thus spread in the east, and yet also a strange hope that some champion had arisen, one who could resist the ever-growing shadow of western lords, for the might of Númenor was now the measuring rod of power in the mortal imagination. In the realm of Rhûn, where the great inland sea mirrored the flaming sunset, lay proud city-states built upon old traditions. The kings there were covetous of power but fractious among themselves. Sauron arrived in one such kingdom, nestled at the mouth of a great river delta, presenting himself as a wandering lord whose country had been swallowed by war. Bit by bit, he demonstrated knowledge of forging steel that was stronger, of cunning devices for war, and of rituals that entwined dread with devotion. The local lords, impressed yet fearful, invited him to their feasts, showering him with gifts. He returned their generosity with a promise that if they bowed to his counsel, he would guide them to glory. Thus did one city after another begin to slip under his indirect rule, enthralled by the might and law he offered. Months passed into years, and the memory of Númenor's invasion in the west grew into legend. Ar-Pharazôn, for his part, believed he had quelled the greatest threat to Middle-earth, for Sauron was nowhere to be found. He did not know that in the hidden East, men were forging alliances that transcended old tribal enmities, all under the quiet influence of a single power. In secret ceremonies under moonless nights, Sauron taught them dark rites. He introduced sacrificial altars, the forging of cursed blades, and the crafting of siege engines that would someday match the best designs of the West. What was once scattered became centralized. Great roads were built that allowed armies and trade to flow more swiftly, always accompanied by the dark banners that signaled loyalty to the one who had bound them all in a common cause. Elves who journeyed eastward, whether out of curiosity or seeking new lands, occasionally vanished. A shadow fell upon the hearts of those who dwelled in the greenwood and beyond. Whispers came back with the wind that some malevolent force was gathering, but it was not recognized as Sauron. Yet wise among the Eldar remembered well that evil cannot be so easily extinguished. Rumor spread to Rivendell and Lindon that indeed the fallen servant of Morgoth might yet roam the wide world, plotting. However, without clear proof, the Eldar chose to remain watchful rather than confront a phantom. They had felt the wrath of Morgoth and his servants before, and they would not lightly march to war without certainty. Over time, Sauron carefully chose loyal men to serve as his captains, each one sworn through vile oaths upon altars consecrated to his power. Some were cunning, others brutal, and each had a reason to hate the West. They were promised immortality in name and legend, if not in flesh, for Sauron alone knew that such gifts belonged only to Ilúvatar and could not be granted by lesser powers. Yet the hearts of men are easily corrupted, and they believed his lies. He shaped them into an army the likes of which had not been seen in the East for countless years. Legions of disciplined foot soldiers clad in dark mail, supported by swift cavalry from the wide steppes, and monstrous creatures found in hidden corners of the world. Trolls were lured from their caves, wargs from the cold mountain passes, and men from every corner who desired power above all else. And so came a time when Sauron no longer needed to hide. Emerging at last in his own might, he claimed a fortress upon a lonely plateau by the distant mountains of the east. It was built in haste and cunning, walls thick with iron gates and watchtowers manned night and day. There, with the symbol of a single eye that burned red upon sable fields, he unveiled himself to the warlike lords. No longer did he use guileful speech alone. He showed them a glimpse of his true power, channeling the malice of Morgoth's legacy and the potency of the One Ring. In kneeling, they pledged eternal loyalty. This fortress became a capital of dread, where ambassadors from distant lands would come, only to return uneasy, carrying the rumor of a dark power enthroned in the east. Not all men succumbed willingly. Some chieftains resisted, but they were quickly subdued, and their heirs learned compliance. In certain corners of the east, free clans still roamed, but they were pursued relentlessly. A suffocating fear spread that soon none might stand against Sauron's dominion. Within his fortress, forging pits blazed day and night, producing arms for an army ever swelling in numbers. The land was scoured for resources. Laborers toiled under whips, building roads that led ever outward, converging upon the seat of his power. Rumors of immense temples rose, hidden behind spiked walls, where Sauron's name was chanted in dread incantations. There, the Eye was worshipped as a god, and men believed they were part of a grand destiny to reclaim Middle-earth from the prideful West. Yet, for all his cunning and malice, Sauron bided his time. He knew that to confront the might of Númenor directly, even now, might lead to his ruin. Ar-Pharazôn, though mortal, was formidable, and the island kingdom's navy remained unmatched. Patience was ever Sauron's ally, and the years to him were but fleeting moments. While he labored to strengthen the east, he did not forget the lands west of Mordor. In secret, he sent emissaries into Harad and Khand, inviting the chieftains there to join this growing coalition. Some answered willingly, others grudgingly, but all saw a new power rising, one that promised to shake the foundations of Middle-earth. When at last word spread that Ar-Pharazôn had turned his attention away from Middle-earth to address the internal strife of Númenor, Sauron smiled. The time was not yet ripe to launch an all-out war, but he began to show himself more boldly. In the deserts of Harad, caravans arrived bearing tribute, gold, precious stones, and slaves. In the steppes of Khand, entire warbands pledged themselves to this new alliance. Far in the east, city-states closed their gates to outsiders, their kings enthralled by the dark counsel of Sauron's servants. A great network of subterfuge and allegiance was woven, linking all these realms in ways that none of the free peoples quite understood. Yet each strand was guided by Sauron's hand, building toward a cataclysmic future. Among the dwarven clans of the Eastern Mountains, those distant from the line of Durin, there were rumors of a forging might that rivaled their own. Some dwarves were drawn to the prospect of trade, others shunned it, sensing something amiss in the dark smoke that rose from forging pits. Occasionally, dwarven merchants or explorers would vanish, never to be heard from again. Others returned with strange trinkets or black-bladed weapons, claiming them to be gifts from a mysterious power. Factions arose within the dwarven halls, some arguing for secrecy and caution, others dreaming of forging alliances to secure wealth and influence. Elvish scouts, ventured from the Greenwood and far beyond, began to note the alarming developments. Though the East had always been vast and home to many mysterious peoples, now there seemed a single will driving them onward. Those who braved the perilous journeys found roads guarded by silent watchers, ancient standing stones marked with symbols akin to an all-seeing eye, and caravans escorted by grim-faced soldiers. The elves heard snatches of a name: Azul, Azar, Sauron, mangled versions of the same identity that many humans could not properly pronounce, but which they invoked with mingled dread and reverence. Slowly, the wise in the West began to suspect that Sauron had indeed found a new seat of power, that he had never bent the knee to Ar-Pharazôn, but instead plotted revenge. It baffled. In Lindon, High King Gil-galad consulted with Elrond and other lords, and worry lined their brows. For if Sauron had not been humbled, he was likely mustering a force unlike any before seen. Messages were sent with urgency to the dwarves of the West, to the men of Middle-earth still free, and even to the few faithful in Númenor who could still read the signs of impending darkness. Yet a great distance lay between West and East, and many who received these tidings were unsure how to respond. Some doubted that Sauron could muster such might again. Others preferred not to provoke him, fearing war might come to them before they were ready. Meanwhile, Sauron's secret dominion multiplied, each day forging new weapons and bending new hearts to his will. At length, a fateful event occurred in the city of Rhuhan, a stronghold among the Easterling kingdoms. A bold prince dared to refuse paying tribute to Sauron's emissaries, believing his city's walls impregnable. In a show of terrible power, a legion of dark-armored warriors, bolstered by monstrous war beasts from the deep south, besieged the city. Within a fortnight, its walls were breached, and the prince was brought before Sauron. The city's defenders found themselves powerless against war machines and sorcery they had never witnessed. Before the trembling masses, Sauron pronounced doom upon the proud prince. In a single gesture, he enacted a spell that stripped the man of breath and life, leaving the onlookers aghast. The city was then made an example, forced to rebuild its own walls under new overlords. Terror and submission spread like wildfire across the east. Word of Rhuhan's fall reached far and wide. Many realms swiftly bent the knee, sending hostages and gold to curry favor. Some formed desperate pacts with one another, hoping to stand firm against Sauron's ascendancy. But these coalitions invariably shattered under internal betrayals or threats from Sauron's growing empire. The East settled into a grim acceptance of the new order, so that even before Sauron personally set foot in their halls, kings and princes had already raised his banners atop their towers. Sacrifices were conducted in his name, forging a twisted cult that further bound the population in fear. From time to time, Sauron would stand upon the highest balcony of his black fortress, gazing westward. His thoughts drifted to the wide seas that led to Númenor. He remembered Ar-Pharazôn's armada, the unthinkable pride of men who would defy even the Valar. Sauron was patient, but he did not forget. In his mind, he envisioned a great war that would one day tear apart Middle-earth, an event that would bring elves, dwarves, and men all to their knees. Vengeance would be his, and he would humble the West as he had done the East. Through cunning and cruelty, he would create a dominion so vast that all would tremble at the utterance of his name. For though Morgoth was cast into the void, Sauron carried forth his legacy of dominion. In those years, the forests of the East became perilous, haunted by creatures twisted in shape and mind, taught by Sauron's minions in ways of stealth and cruelty. Any who dared wander without Sauron's leave risked capture or worse. Over the plains rode warbands that enforced new tributes, punishing any who withheld. Everywhere roads thickened with the tread of marching feet, caravans of supplies and caged wagons of captives. The East was a land in chains, its people set to labor in great mines and quarries, forging a war machine with no equal. Over it all rose the Black Fortress, a symbol of unwavering will, a monument to the cunning that had evaded Númenor's grasp. Yet the seeds of rebellion remained. A few captains chafed under the iron rule. Some glimpsed the terrible knowledge that Sauron was not an ordinary king, but something far darker, one who might promise the world but claim souls in return. In hidden groves and remote hills, rebels and fugitives gathered. Messages were covertly sent to the elves of the West, pleading for aid. But the distance was great, and the watchers on the borders swiftly silenced many such pleas. Sauron's agents were diligent, ensuring that no united resistance could form. Still, hope is a strange thing, fleeting, yet so often found where logic declares none can remain. So, in secret, these hidden hearts waited for an opportunity, a crack in the fortress's facade, while the unstoppable darkness pressed down upon them. Among his lieutenants was a warlord named Gazrul, an Easterling of fierce aspect who had once been a prince in his own right. Gazrul was proud, cunning, and utterly loyal to Sauron, yet he quietly hungered for a share of that same power. On the day Sauron crowned him with an iron circlet, naming him Overlord of the Eastern Plains, the warlord bowed, but his eyes glinted with ambition. Sauron let it remain, for ambition was a useful tool. A servant who desired more would perform valiantly, hoping to curry favor. So the East was governed by men like Gazrul, each controlling a vast territory, each compelled by fear and the promise of reward. As the years rolled on, the changes in the East became unmistakable. A vast new capital city sprang up around the Black Fortress, fed by forced labor and tributes from across thousands of leagues. Grand avenues lined with imposing statues of Sauron's captains bore witness to the relentless progress. Strange towers were erected at cardinal points, each one a node of dark sorcery, meant to sense any incursion from outside forces. Skilled craftsmen, many coerced from their homelands, were put to work shaping architecture of menacing elegance. Vaulted arches and spired roofs overshadowed the throngs of the oppressed. In the deep of night, distant chanting could be heard, echoing across the plains. Homages to Sauron, the one who had escaped the downfall Morgoth faced, now shaping the world to his own design. Yet in Númenor, decades after Ar-Pharazôn's victory in the West, the memory of Sauron's supposed surrender had grown into a half-forgotten legend. Few in the island kingdom concerned themselves with the affairs of Middle-earth. Only the faithful, led by Amandil and others of the royal line who yet revered the Valar, remained vigilant. Ships occasionally traveled to Pelagia and other outposts, but they did not venture far inland. Thus, the silent expansion of Sauron's empire went largely unnoticed, cloaked by distance, pride, and the illusions of safety. While Númenor decayed under its own hubris and the shadow of mortality that haunted its kings, Sauron built a domain that outmatched all the realms of men in Middle-earth. The storm gathered, and none in the West truly realized its size. Eventually, hints of this dark empire reached Elendil and his sons through scattered accounts of refugees who fled the east, crossing Harad or skirting Mordor's edges. They spoke of an overlord whose symbol was a burning eye, who demanded worship and laid waste to any city that defied him. Even Gil-galad, far in Lindon, received ominous tidings. The wise understood that such a shadow could not be met with half measures. Alliances would need forging, old enmities set aside, but even as the free lords of Middle-earth contemplated this new threat, the question remained: how to strike at a power that encompassed distant lands, hidden behind leagues of hostile territory. And so the final watch of peace before the storm settled upon Middle-earth, a tense anticipation of conflict to come. The realm in the east continued to grow, forging new weapons, forging new evils. Sauron himself delved deeper into the arts of sorcery, twisting the wills of men who served him into a nightmarish reflection of his own malice. His knowledge of secret runes expanded. Old artifacts were sought out, their powers studied, and if they could not be bent to his service, they were destroyed to prevent any foe from using them. In locked vaults, guarded by monstrous wards, the most powerful relics and weapons were stored, for Sauron cherished every advantage in the war he was sure would someday come. Still, he waited. Now and then he would raise the One Ring and contemplate the silent lure it cast upon all living things, binding them to his inexorable design. Through the ring he tasted the fleeting hopes and hidden fears that existed far away. The dread of men, the resolve of elves, the stubborn pride. He found satisfaction in how he had turned what might have been his greatest defeat into a new empire. Indeed, perhaps a mightier realm than even Morgoth had shaped in the First Age. He cared not for the measure of years. Immortality was his by right of being Maiar, and the cunning gleaned from Morgoth's service had taught him that dominion claimed in haste often toppled easily. His orcs, once scattered and dejected after the downfall of Mordor, were now reorganized, vastly reinforced by human auxiliaries from the east. In hidden smithies, new breeds of weapons took shape. Ballistae that could hurl flaming darts over city walls, siege towers that rolled on iron wheels, and monstrous contraptions that roared with dark sorcery. Under Sauron's watch, they were tested upon captive towns. The wails of those trapped inside added to his grim legend, for Sauron believed fear to be as potent a weapon as any sword. Over all the east hung a brooding gloom, as if the land itself felt the weight of his ambition. The day would come when the West would be forced to confront him again. Perhaps it would be in Gil-galad's time, or perhaps only when Elendil and his line were fully established in Middle-earth after the downfall of Númenor. But the difference in this telling was profound. Sauron, never yielding, had instead mastered an entire half of the continent, forging alliances unthinkable in the old days. When at last the final clash came, Middle-earth would quake beneath the tread of armies beyond counting, and the free peoples would face a foe greater in cunning, wealth, and numbers than any since Morgoth's time. Such was the consequence of that single choice Sauron made, to flee rather than kneel. And so the East lay in silence, overshadowed by the new Dark Lord, while the West slept in the illusion of victory. In that silence, the doom of Middle-earth was orphaned.